أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين شفيع المذنبين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد صل على محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من يوم عداوتهم إلى يوم الدين أما بعد فقد قال الله عز وجل في كتابه الحكيم وهو أصدق القائلين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل على Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I begin in the name of Allah, the most kind, the most merciful. It's due to that kindness and mercy that we have these opportunities where we gather in remembrance and glorification of Him, Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. We then send our condolences to our 12th and living Imam, Al-Hujjah Ajjalallahu Ta'ala Farajahu Sharif, and to each and every one of you as we gather on this night to commemorate the martyrdom anniversary of our first Imam, Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhim afdalus salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we each get an opportunity to go for the ziyarat of our Imam in Najaf, and that we receive his shafa'at in the hereafter, insha'Allah. We are discussing Sermon 176 of Imam alayhi salam. And as we said, that one of the ways that we should read this sermon, not in particular, but in general, but you feel it in this one, is that the Imam has this immense care that's behind his words. Sometimes as a parent, you warn your child, you try to guide your child, but there's nothing more you can do besides verbalize to them your care and concern. And it's frustrating when that care and concern is not met on that side or appreciated on that side of your child. They think it's just advice. You keep nagging, you keep talking, right? But the parent has this immense care that, no, I deeply care for you, right? And this is how I think the Imam is addressing us in this sermon. I think we have to look at it from that lens. The Imam has this immense passion in trying to guide us, to save us from Jahannam, to take us to Jannah, while recognizing that being a good believer is not easy in this world. And so he's saying, just listen to what God has to say. It's not complicated. Follow what God has to say. It removes a lot of the complication that we add to our lives. And so this is part of the message of this sermon, isn't it? To listen to what God has to say, to follow what the Quran is telling us. And that's what we've covered basically over the past two lectures in the way the Imam described it. The next part of this, right after the discussion on the Quran, the Imam has this one statement. And this is what we'll focus our lecture on today. But the Imam says, Al-amal al-amal, thumma nihayata nihaya, wal-istiqamata al-istiqama, thumma as-sabr, thumma was-sabr, wal-wara' wal-wara'. He repeats every word twice in this. 5 words he repeats twice. I haven't read every kalam of the Imam, but this is the first time I've seen this type of statement, where he says al-amal al-amal, right? And it's wal-istiqama al-istiqama, yeah? Like it's in English doesn't justify, like act, but like you can understand what the Imam is trying to say. So how does it translate? Al-amal al-amal. The Imam says act, yeah? Like action is what is required. Thumma nihaya an-nihaya. And then this nihaya means the end, right? It can be translated, this statement, in different ways. It can be translated to say that look at the end of what you're doing, right? In other words, you're acting, but act with the knowledge of what's at the end line. So rather than just acting blindly or foolishly, but act in a way that you know, okay, this is going to serve me or benefit me at the end. But we'll break it down each one. Wal istiqama means steadfast. So be steadfast in what you're doing. So act, look towards the end, be steadfast, thumma sabr, and then have patience, right? And then finally al-wara, have piety in what you do. And so we will look at these five and how they work together. But it's interesting when you look at the tafsir of such khutbahs, the scholars are very beautifully saying that what he's describing here is a 5-step journey towards attaining closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That anything that we want to do, we have to use these 5-step methodology to get to Allah. And it actually, this 5 steps, again, of action and knowing the end and steadfastness and patience and piety is what leads a human being towards their perfection, right? And so when we find ourselves lacking that perfection, it's somewhere along this line of this 5-step journey where we have not focused our attention on, you know? Maybe it could be the first where I'm not backing my statements up with action, right? So it's behind this statement. If you look at this statement as a line, prior to it is one's faith and one's intention and all of these things, and then starts action, isn't it, right? So action is something that's developed after we have already done some preambles prior to that. And then the post is obviously the closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the Imam starts off by saying al-amal, action, right? Now, some scholars say that because this statement is directly after the description of the Quran. If you remember yesterday we described through the words of the Imam the Quran, and we gave some very, in my humble opinion, some really positive ways of interacting with the Quran if we focused on that yesterday, inshallah. So scholars believe that when the Imam alayhi salam is telling us to act here, it's in direct reference to one's attachment to the Holy Quran. So you read the Quran, you have this connection with the Holy Quran, but don't stop your connection with the Holy Quran only through reading, rather act on the teachings of the Holy Quran, right? And so what the Imam alayhi salam is telling us, al-amal, is to act on the teachings of the Quran. And this is what something Allah has told us all the time, isn't it? Yeah, that those who are successful are those who believe, yeah, وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, right? Like those who do have iman and those who back that iman up with action. And so if we look at it from that lens, that what's expected from us is to act on the teachings of the Quran, this is something that I didn't get a chance to talk about yesterday, but it's really something that we should try to engage in, you know. Like I said last year, and again, I honestly say this, like I don't ever tell you to do something without me dabbling or trying in it, you know. And so last year we had talked about the importance of interacting with the Quran in a different way. And so part of that interaction that I had suggested and that I tried this year, and it worked quite well, you know, like so I said I'm going to read the Quran in English, right? And then I'm going to make a list of verses that seem interesting, verses that I don't understand, that I have to go read more on it, and verses maybe that I can create a lecture on. So that was just me, right? So that this is how I broke down my reading of the Quran. But another way we can also break down the reading of the Quran, and I hope we do this, is that when Allah talks about certain characteristics in the Quran, we should make a list of those characteristics, right? And the Quran is very much a blueprint for success and a blueprint in describing what will lead to our failure, right? And so if I want to know what nifaq looks like, Allah gives me a list in the Quran of what a hypocrite looks like. If I want to know what a mu'min looks like, Allah gives me a list of what a mu'min looks like. If I want to know who are those who possess intellect based on God, He gives me a list of their characteristics. If I want to know what a person who is a kafir looks like, Allah gives me a list of the characteristics. If we engage with God in that way, where I say, okay, you have described for me 10 characteristics, now let me see how many I have. Right? Let me see how many I have to work on. Let me see how many I have to add. Then what will happen is that our interaction with the Holy Quran will go into an entire different sphere, and then the responsibility after that would be to act. And so the act is really important. We talked about this yesterday, and again, I repeat this today because the Imam repeated it today. Again, that he's saying act. Action is important. And if we want to just expand it and not limit it to the Quran, right? The importance of action is an overarching advice that the Imam gives in all facets of our lives. That action is what we're going to be judged by. Like, I know we have this hadith that says that your actions, that you will be judged by your niyyah, right? But even that hadith that says you will be judged by your intention, that is, you're going to be judged. So what does that mean? You're going to be judged by your intention. Inna a'malu bin niyat, we are told, right? That your actions are based on your intentions. It's still actions though, you know what I mean? Inna a'mal bin niyat. So you can't just be I can't give a fake niyyah and be like, I would donate. But then I know I'm not going to even come close to donating, right? That has no value to God. That type of intention, right? Has no value to God. But let's say I make an intention to donate, and then I get an unexpected bill, and now I don't have that money anymore. That's where al-a'malu bin niyat comes in. That you will be given the reward as though you donated, but you couldn't because of a circumstance that came up that you couldn't, you had no control over, right? Or, for example, I said I'm going to wake up for Salatul Layl, and then my battery dies of my phone. Happens, you know what I mean? I didn't plan it thoroughly properly, or I plugged it in and it didn't plug. Whatever, it could happen. It's happened to all of us, right? Well, in those circumstances, the a'malu bin niyat kicks in. You'll be rewarded by your niyyah. But if I don't even set an alarm and I'll be like, Yallah, layl tomorrow, yeah? There's no niyyah there. There's nothing there, right? And so this is where we understand that in those circumstances when action wasn't possible, yes, you'll be judged on your niyyah. But in all other circumstances, man, what God is looking at is action. He's looking for action. Because there are too many people who speak, right? Too many people who are very well eloquent in describing their allegiance and their loyalty and their iman, and too many people who are very good at chanting Ya Haydar and Ya Ali, but then when you look at their life, there's no action like the life of Haydar, right? There is nothing similar to Haydar in their lives. And so this is where I think sometimes we have to remind ourselves that al-amal, that's what God looks at, action. Are you backing it up with something, or are you just speaking? Because if it's just speech, then as far as God is concerned, that speech lacks value, because anyone can speak, right? And so number one, the Imam alayhi salam says we have to act. And this is where all of us, no matter what we want to accomplish, try to make it doable, actionable. And this is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will then favor us additionally. And then the Imam alayhi salam says, Thumman nihayatan nihaya. And then look at the end and the end. Now obviously this is connected to the action, right? That we talked about. That whenever we act, the end that the Imam is talking about is akhirah, right? An-nihayatan nihaya. Whatever I'm going to act on, if that action is not going to benefit me in akhirah, then leave it, right? Leave it. And if that action is supposed to help me in akhirah, don't ever leave it. Yeah, don't ever leave it. You know what I mean? Even if it's very difficult for me, create a program, create a plan, act. Still, action is required, right? But if my understanding of akhirah is solidified, right? It's improved to where that becomes my driving force of action, then action won't be difficult even if it's difficult. Ooh, I repeated that many times, but you get it or no, right? So even if akhirah is that important to me, and success in akhirah is that important to me, but the action that will bring me success in akhirah is difficult, that difficulty won't matter because akhirah is that important to me. I will do it, right? And nihaya is so important. Like, what's your goal, right? What's your drive? And we have this, right? Like, we have this drive for worldly things. We absolutely do. You know what I mean? That if you think about, especially those who migrate here, like new migrants here, or those who migrated a while ago, and you look at the sacrifices you had to make to ensure your family had food on their tables. You know what I mean? You would work maybe 2 jobs, and you would come home and you would barely sleep, and then you would go again and you would grind and you would grind and you would grind. Why? Because you had a goal, man. You had to put food on the table for your family. You know what I mean? Like, I look at my own days, like when I got to a point where, man, I had to graduate university. It's taking too long, you know what I mean? I had to work graveyard, right? So I used to work 12 till 8 in the morning, and then go to university from 10 in the morning till 4 in the evening, and then sleep from 5 to 10 and repeat, right? And I used to do this for a year and a half. Why? At that point, it didn't seem like a big deal because the nihaya was important. Get out of school, yeah? Get out of school, finish a job, get a job, graduate, get a job, get married. We set these benchmarks, and we're doing anything we can to accomplish it. Well, God is saying, set your benchmark to akhirah and do whatever you can to get there, right? That's what Allah wants. Action based on this nihaya, this end result. However, interestingly, there's another way to look at it too. So when the Imam says, al-amal, thumma nihayat al-nihaya, he's saying act until the completion of that act. Yeah, not the akhirah, but until the completion of that act. The nihaya here is not akhirah. The nihaya here is the end of the act. So for example, it's easy to do something once. It's easy to do something twice, maybe even a handful of times. But to do something consistently till it becomes a habitual part of me, it's not easy, especially when that act is not easy, right? So again, we give these examples. Like, I can be kind to somebody once, I can be forgiving to somebody once, but to repeat that act of kindness and that forgiveness is not something that comes naturally or easily. But I have to consistently do it because the Imam says that if it's going to be good for you, consistently do it. This is where I think it's really important we take a lesson from Shahrul Ramadhan, In Shahrul Ramadhan, it's out of the grace of God very easy for us to do the things that we do. You know what I mean? It's very easy for us to read Quran in the month of Ramadan. I don't know why. SubhanAllah, it is, Like, we actually are motivated to read Quran in the month of Ramadan. But you ask anybody to read 50 ayahs every day at the other time, no one's going to do it. Be like, nah, right? It's not going to happen, right? Like, if you ask, it's easy to recite these du'as every night that we recite. I don't know why. It's easy, right? It's not bad. Like, I don't find any, taxing, right? To read a 30-minute dua every night. But Mama, try to do that outside of Ramadan, right? And so what Allah is saying is that there are certain times when it's easy to do certain things. Fine, do it at that time. But the real end, the real goal is to do it when it doesn't become easy anymore, when it's a struggle. That's when the true value comes in. So that nihaya is to see that action through the end. Now to do that, to get to that nihaya, the Imam alayhi salam says, wal istiqamat al istiqama, right? Be steadfast. Steadfast. Istiqama is like, to put your feet firm on the ground and persevere, right? And to do what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants, right? Here, that what Allah subhanahu or the Imam alayhi salam is intending is that while we perform the action, we have to be, so again, we're acting and we're acting till the completion of that action. The Imam is saying, and so while you are acting to the completion of that action, be steadfast. But steadfast in what? Steadfast in ensuring that the reason you are doing that action in the first place is still the reason why you're doing it now. You understand? Right? Because when I begin to do that action, that is when just the whispering of shaitan will come into my ear. Yeah, that mashallah, look at that beautiful salah. Yeah, that mashallah, look at that guy. He's not like you at all. You're so much better. Yeah, that mashallah, look at you. You're keeping Islam alive. Right? Shaitan has a very wicked way of exaggerating what we are doing. And so we see, for example, actions like pride, like showing off, riyah comes in, or I start to judge other people. We're so good at that, like we begin to feel a sense of superiority in what we do. And this is why, again, I think this khutbah ties in so beautifully, right? Because one of the first pieces of advice the Imam alayhi salam gave us was to humiliate your soul every single day, to humble your soul, right? And to remind your soul that it's really nothing of any virtue. There's nothing good in it. And so you humble it. Why? So that the steadfastness is not so difficult, right? And so this is where, my brothers and sisters, it's so important, right? That we're able to ensure that the intention behind my original action was something that is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then the Imam says, as-sabr, right? So he has already told us to act, and he told us to complete the act, and then he told us make sure that you're steadfast when you complete that act. But in that journey, he says you have to have a lot of patience. As-sabr, right? Endurance. As-sabr here can be translated as endurance. It can be translated as patience. But whatever it is, it can work on two ways that this patience he's talking about. Obviously, if my goal is success in akhirah, it's going to require a ton of patience to get there. You know what I mean? Because in that planning or in that journey of trying to be successful in akhirah, I have to battle my desires every single day. You know what I mean? It's a struggle. Right? It's an absolute struggle. And this is where the struggle, and I want y'all to listen to me, especially my young ones here, I say this to you all the time. The struggle doesn't have to be so difficult. It only becomes difficult when you've tasted sin. Yeah? Or you've allowed yourself to become manipulated by your desires. But if you don't, and you're actually very vigilant and able to control your desires, then the pull of your desires is not as strong. And I tell you, anyone who's now has gray like I do, if you could tell us to go back, we would go back and not allow our desires to run wild. Because today we pay the price of our desires running wild. Right? And so it's not worth it. It's not worth those little pleasurable things that we think make us happy, when in the long run it's going to become a battle for me to fight my desires. And so this is why the Imam says you're going to need a lot of patience if you're going to do this, right? You have to endure it. That yes, these things, you know how it feels, you know how it felt, you know how it smelt, you know how it tasted. Don't do it. Don't go for it. Have a lot of patience and fight it. And in that jihad is our victory. That victory is that struggle. But additionally, what's really cool is that if you look at it, that if we're acting down this path, right, that's taking us to our nihaya, is taking us to our end, then naturally the direction that we are flowing is opposite to the direction that the world is flowing. Right? Because the world is not flowing towards akhirah, the world is flowing towards the world. Right? And anyone flowing on the world side, we will float past each other on this stream. We will see them going towards certain things, while I'll have to be patient in not wanting those things that they are flowing towards. And so what will happen is, if I am really intent on meeting that goal of akhirah and the success in akhirah, I will have to forego many of the pleasures that people in this world are participating in. Whether it be certain type of friendships I'll have to forego, whether it be certain types of financial success I'll have to forego, whether it be certain type of promotions at work I'll have to forego. Yeah? I'll have to do it, while my goal is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah? We're not saying every promotion or every raise is bad, but there's definitely times when that promotion and that raise requires a sacrifice of our faith. Yeah? And if really I want to drive down this way, the Imam alayhi salam says, as-sabr, as-sabr, be patient. Right? Because you know what your nihaya is. Right? What the Imam is asking here, you can see why it's not easy. And you can also see why these are the steps towards one's kamal, one's perfection. That if you now decide that I'm going to commit to God, what do you need? You need to act. You can't just say I'm committing to God. Yeah, you need to act, right? And you need to do the things that God says. And you have to have the goal of that end, right? And then you have to be steadfast and you have to be patient. And then the last aspect, the Imam alayhi salam says, al-wara al-wara. Yeah, he says you need piety. Yeah, and piety is of different levels. You know, if you recall last year we talked about piety. There are levels of piety, what it means to be pious. You know, wara is very close in definition to taqwa. You know, taqwa is God consciousness. Wara are the steps to ensure God consciousness. You understand? Yeah? Yeah. Just nod your heads, even if you're tired. Just nod your heads. Be with me, yeah? Taqwa is God consciousness. Like I'm mindful of God at all times. Wara is to ensure that I take the right steps to continue down that God consciousness. So it's an active way of ensuring that I don't allow things into my life that will distract my God consciousness, right? And so there's levels to that. And the number one level of God consciousness, or of wara, is to avoid sinning. Yeah, that's the first basic step. After that, there are levels. If you read, for example, 40 hadith of Imam Khomeini rahimahullah, he talks about the wara of regular people, which is me, and then you have the wara of the khas, the elect, then you have the wara of the zahidun, the zuhud, people who practice zuhud, then you have the wara of the awliya. There are layers and layers of wara. The common folk wara, piety, is to avoid sinning. That's it, just avoid sinning. Right? Subhanallah. Not even that hard, is it? Yeah? Avoid sinning. You know the hadith, our first Imam, he says that when the Prophet delivered that sermon for Shahru Ramadhan, Imam stood up and he said, Ya Rasulullah, ma afdalul a'mal fi hadha shahr. Like in the month of Ramadan, he says to the Prophet that, Ya Rasulullah, what's the best action one can do in the month of Ramadan? To which the Prophet said, Ya Abul Hasan, afdalul a'mal fi hadha shahr al-wara an maharimillah. Yeah? The best action, yeah, that a person can do in the month of Ramadan is to safeguard themselves from doing anything haram. Best action. Subhanallah. More than reading Quran, more than praying Salatul Layl, more than doing anything mustahab, just don't sin in this month. That's it. One job we have. Don't sin in this month, right? And this is where we see that in the eyes of God, like if I don't sin, I'm considered to be pious. How beautiful. Yeah, you know, we think pious are people who wear topis and, you know, like things like, no, hold tasbihs. Yeah, no, you just don't sin. You're pious in the eyes of God. Yeah? And so these 5 steps are really cool what the Imam talks about. Yeah? Simple steps, and you should know these by now. We need to act, We need to have the end result in mind. We need to have istiqamah, steadfastness in ensuring that our intentions stay pure. And then we have to have sabr, to ensure that we are going down this path. And finally, piety. Avoid sinning. So you can't corrupt all of these other things and then sin. It's not going to work, right? So stop sinning. And then the Imam says, and it's very cool. He says, you should do these things. Why? These 5 things. And he says that it shouldn't, basically saying that these 5 things shouldn't be difficult for you to do. Right? Why? Because you have been destined for a great end, the Imam says. So go towards your destined end. In other words, he says that Jannah has been promised to you. He says, what more motivation do you want to act than Jannah has been promised to you? Right? He says, and surely you have been given clear signs. So take the guidance of these signs. For indeed Islam has an objective, and go towards that objective. Don't create your own path, the Imam is saying. Don't create your own destiny. Don't create your own goals. The destiny has been given to you. The goals have been given to you. The objective has been given to you. We like to reinvent stuff. You know what I mean? Don't reinvent. The wheel has been created. Right on. And keep going. And then the Imam ends this passage by something really beautiful. He says, if you do these 5 things, and you are steadfast in them, he says, in the end, ana shahidun lakum. He says, I will come as a witness for you on the day of judgment. Amir al-Mu'mineen. Amir. He says, I will come as a witness for you. وَحَجِيجٌ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ أَنْكُمْ. And I shall plead for you on your behalf on the day of judgment, he says. Subhanallah. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. These things are not small. Even if I am teetering between good and bad. But if Imam comes and says, Ya Allah, I like him. You don't think Imam, Allah will say, okay, bring him then. You don't think? Of course He will. But for the Imam to like us, there's action required, my brothers and sisters. This is one life we have, right? Let's not waste it by following our own path. But the path has been given to us. Let us follow this path towards Allah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Man. This was the beauty of our Imam, that his compassion knew no limits. That even though the people he lived around, many of them were compassionless, but the Imam alayhi salam was consistent in his desire for their success. We have reached the 21st night of Shahr Ramadan. Since the 19th night and the 20th night and 21st, the Imam's condition has continuously begun to deteriorate. Muhammad bin Hanafiya, his son, says that by the 21st night, the entire color of the skin of my father had changed. The poison had afflicted his entire body. And the Imam alayhi salam knew that these were the final moments of his life. And so he told his companions that leave my house now, so that my family can mourn in this sadness. He just said all of the companions left. But there was one companion who could not leave the doorstep of Ali. This was Asbagh bin Nabata. Asbagh stayed at the door of Ali. And when the tears and the cries from the house of Ali could be heard by Asbagh, Asbagh couldn't control it. And Asbagh began to cry as well. And that is when Imam al-Hasan comes out and says to him, Ya Asbagh, your Imam has told you to leave. But it is like Asbagh says that I cannot find the strength to get up from the door of my Imam. He says, I desire to see my Imam one more time. It is said Imam gives him this permission. And when Asbagh sees that condition of the Imam, he begins to cry. The Imam says to him, La tabki ya Asbagh. فَإِنَّهَا وَاللَّهِ الْجَنَّةِ. He says, do not cry, Asbaq. He says, I see Jannah in front of me. Asbaq says, Ya Imam, these tears are not because you are going towards Jannah. I know you are going towards Jannah. But he says, وَإِنَّمَا أَبْكِي لِفَقْدِكَ يَا أَمِيرَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. I am crying because we are going to lose you now, Ya. Who will be there to guide us? Together they mourn one last time. It is said the doctor would now, the physician in Kufa would come to see the Imam alayhi salam. It is said he placed some type of skin on the cut of the Imam. And then after a few minutes he removed the skin and he noticed that bits of the brain of the Imam alayhi salam were on this. And he says to his family and Imam that now there is nothing else that we can do for you, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen. It is time for you to become comfortable. It is time for you to give your wasiyah. And it is said that, oh Imam, that's the only thing that will now possibly give you comfort will be some milk. It is said that milk was brought towards the Imam. But look at the akhlaq of the Imam, that whenever any glass of milk or a bowl of milk was brought in front of him, the Imam would sip this milk and then he would give the rest and say, take it to Ibn Muljim. Do not forget that he may be thirsty. Do not forget that he may be hungry. This was that akhlaq of that Imam of ours. But I wonder why, huh? And then I remember the Imam is in Kufa. This is that place where they will shoot arrows at a 6-month-old child when Hussein will ask for water for that child. He wanted to serve as a reminder to them that when someone is thirsty, you do not play with that emotion. How my heart goes to Sakina at this time. You know that when Sakina wanted water, what did the Mal'oon Shimr do at that time? He said, I will give you water as soon as I feed and give water to all of my army. And then when he gave water to right in front of her face, he spilled this water on the ground. Wa Husayna, wa Aliya, oh Ali, look at how they treat your family, oh Ali. Imam Ali called his children towards him now. He says that I had seen your grandfather in my dream and he had told me that, Ya Abul Hassan, from 3 nights from now you will join me. He says, it has been 3 days and I will soon be leaving this world. The Imam alayhi salam advised his children and the Shia that the Imam after him will be Hassan. And then after him will be Hussein. And then he looked towards the 5-year-old Zain al-Abidin and said, after Hussein, the Imam will be Ali bin Hussein. And then the Imam alayhi salam became unconscious when the Imam opened his eyes and said, Hada Rasulullah. على عمي حمزة وأخي جعفر كلهم يقولون عجل قدومك علينا. He says, I see the Prophet now. I see Hamza now. They are telling me, come quickly, O Ali. We miss being with you. Ali stretches his arms and legs. Ali faces the Qibla and begins to recite, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika la وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. And then the Imam took his last breath. رحم الله من نادى وإماما. رحم الله من نادى وعليا. The sounds of tears began to come in the house of Ali. Cry, O Shia, cry, for Ali ibn Abi Talib has left this world. فسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. ماتم حسين.